You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast, season 2, believe it or not, episode 92. This one, the Cubs trade options at DH and third base. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on the socials. Fly the W670 on Twitter, Instagram, and Fly the W on Facebook. Or, of course, you can email Crawly and I, flythew670@gmail.com. Crawly, happy Thursday. How the heck are you?
Doing good. I think it's funny because after we recorded our last podcast about possible starting pitching options in first baseman, the very next day, John Morosi tweeted that the Cubs and Reds were the teams in trade talks for Shane Bieber and Tyler Glasnow, which were two names we brought up. So, you know what, man, this stuff is happening like up to the minute. Like we talk about something and it's happening right now.
Right. Let's hope that we have an emergency podcast between now and Monday, maybe on one of those two names, or maybe even, Crawly, a bigger name. I don't know if you got to hear the Mully and Haw show this morning. I know you have other things to do, but you do hear part of it. I think it was later in the show, so you're already doing your big boy job. David Haw claims that if Shohei Ohtani signs with the Cubs, that he will do a headstand live on the air on our Twitch station.
I'm going to have to watch that. I've seen David before, and I didn't know he was that agile. It'll be fun to watch.
Yeah.
But
that's
yeah,
that's one more reason. That's one more reason you want Shohei Ohtani as a Cub, just to see David Haw do a headstand on the Twitch channel for Mully and Haw on 670 The Score.
There's going to be a lot. The winter meetings are next week. We'll get to that, but you know, a lot of action's about to start happening, and that's what makes it exciting, especially when your team is a buyer and not a seller.
That's right. So third base and DH, Crawly, that's where we're at this week.
Yeah, we talked about this last time, right? You know, you can get free agents or you can trade. And with the Cubs having a good farm system, that's an option. And so, you know, obviously if if a player that you're targeting and trade doesn't have a lot of years left on their contract, you don't have to give up as much. The better the player, the more you have to give up. So those are things that we're looking at. And when we looked at these lists of DH and third baseman, these are names that have popped up. Some tying to the Cubs, some not, but that these are guys that are available for trade. The teams are kind of being made known that these guys are available for trade. And obviously the biggest name of all is Juan Soto. He is the most coveted trade piece, and boy, you know, for a DH, it would just be great. Here's the thing. We know the Padres are financially in trouble, and we're going to talk a little bit about that with our guest, Michael Cerami, today. Some of the finances going on just in baseball. You know, the Padres had to take out a loan, but there's a big problem with a lot of these RSNs, the regional sports networks, that have kind of put these teams in a bind. Soto is 25 years old, Dustin, entering his final year of club control. He is projected to get $33 million in arbitration, which would be the highest ever yearly salary for an arbitration eligible player. Now, Juan Soto rejected a $440 million offer from the Nationals before he was traded to the Padres in 2022 trade deadline. So if you're thinking, $500 million is what we're probably looking at after the 2024 season, Dustin.
Is that the red flag? Is that it, Crawly? That's got to be the red flag to me, right? That he thinks that he's worth $500 million. I mean, there's a couple of things when we talk about, and I know we're going to talk about him, Shohei Ohtani. And again, these are the two biggest offensive stars in free agency are Shohei Ohtani and Juan Soto. And then there's Cody Bellinger, right? But Cody Bellinger is a step below those two individuals. But Shohei Ohtani might be able to pitch. Shohei Ohtani will be able to deliver an entire continent of economic resources, which Juan Soto does not. So if it's apples and apples, in that case, I've got to go Ohtani versus Soto.
So here's the thing. Soto's 25 years old, so he's 5 years younger than Ohtani.
That matters. That does matter. Yep.
Ohtani does have the arm, the two Tommy Johns, and we don't know how that's going to affect him. Probably not going to affect him hitting, but at least pitching wise. Now, the thing, Dustin, when you ask if he's worth it, he had a slow start, Dustin, last year, and he finished 275, 410, 519 with 35 home runs and 109 RBIs. So not bad for a slow start of a season. Now, what I take a look at sometimes in Baseball Reference, there's a feature and it's called similarity scores, where they look at a player's numbers and compare them to other players of the same age range. So when you look through the history of MLB, here are the players most similar to Juan Soto at age 24. Tell me if you pick up what's similar between these 10 players that are most like Juan Soto at age 24. Bryce Harper, Frank Robinson, Andrew Jones, Giancarlo Stanton, Mike Trout, Ken Griffey Jr., Juan Gonzalez, Orlando Cepeda, Miguel Cabrera, and Eddie Matthews. What do they all have in common?
Well, about half of them have HOF in front of their name, and the other half are probably close to HOF. There might be one, my Hall of Fame is a little different than everybody else's. I'm a little harder of a judge, I believe. But they're all Hall of Famers at age 24. Let's put it this way. If their career only went up to age 24, they are probably all Hall of Famers. And most of these guys on the list kept getting better after 24.
Correct. The only ones that didn't, Giancarlo Stanton's had injury history. Andrew Jones is a borderline Hall of Famer. People believe he should be in.
Don't ask Bobby Cox.
And Juan Gonzalez is and call him, and don't call him a coach. And Juan Gonzalez was tainted with steroid stuff. So he would have been a Hall of Famer with his numbers. So basically you are going to have maybe 8 to 10 years of a guy that's projected to be on the Hall of Fame. And so that is something you got to take a look at there. Now, the price for Juan Soto will be astronomical, both in terms of prospects for 1 year and after the season's over. So you're going to have to give up a couple of really top-tier prospects.
That's the other part of this, right? Like with Ohtani, you don't have to give anything up. And who's to say that after this year, if you are swinging and missing, pun intended, on Ohtani, it just doesn't work out, then why can't you sign Soto next year, right? I'm just saying, they're all so far, Crawly, everything you're mentioning, they're all good, but there's a couple of check marks against Soto where I don't have them against Ohtani other than age.
I agree 100% with you, because I think that if this was the final piece, if you were just one hitter away, you think, from making the World Series, then you pull the trigger.
Right.
But he's going to be there next year. So why would you give something up and then not know if you could re-sign him and lose 2 or 3 of your very top prospects in the system? It's hard to do,
See, this is why this is what's good about a podcast, Crawly. It's good to talk it out, right? We're talking it out, no knee-jerk reaction. So this is good. I like it.
Now, Eloy Jimenez, how about a reunion with old Eloy, right?
No, I can end that really quick now. No. I mean, okay, obviously you're not going to play him in left, okay, right? But he doesn't want to be a DH. He wants to be a left fielder. He's a clown. No, Crawly, this is simple. He's got too much White Sox stink on him. No. Go ahead. Talk me into it, but it's going to be really hard to do. Too much White Sox stink on him.
I'm going to attempt Jimenez / 272, 317, 441 with 18 home runs and 64 RBIs.
18 home runs? BFD.
We know that he's injured a lot. He played 120 games, which for him is a lot. He's never played more than 122 games in a season. He can't play outfield. He needs to be a full-time DH. Would Eloy want to do that? He said he hasn't. But I decided, Dustin, you and I both have been eye-rolling the thanks Cubs for a long time, what Eloy's numbers were against the Cubs and what his numbers are at Wrigley Field, okay? He played 16 games versus the Cubs, and he slashes 356, 433, 780 with 21 hits, 7 doubles, 6 home runs, and 19 RBIs with 8 walks.
Now, is that because he's motivated against the Cubs? Like, hey, I'm going to show you guys what you missed out on, or I'm going to take this rivalry seriously, maybe more seriously than some of the Cubs players do?
How about this, Dustin? At Wrigley Field, 9 games, he slashes 412, 444, 912 at Wrigley with 14 hits, 5 doubles, 4 homers, and 8 RBIs. I just wonder, Dustin, like you said, maybe it's motivation for trading him, whatever, but could you imagine those numbers over 81 games at Wrigley?
Those numbers sound really great.
It's not going to happen.
If they played out over 81, of course, the guy would be in the Hall of Fame after this year, right? I mean, no, thank you. Absolutely. Thanks, Cubs, but no.
$13 million for 2024 is what he's getting with a club option for 2025 and 2026. So if you wanted to buy him out, you'd have to pay him $3 million the following year. He's going to earn 16.5 in 2025 and 18.5 in 2026.
Now,
you wouldn't have to give up a lot of prospects.
He's cheap, right? He's baseball cheap. Probably not have to give up. The Sox are looking for starting pitching, right? No doubt about it. They basically right now don't have a pitching staff. They don't have a starting rotation. So that's what they're going to be looking for. Maybe they'd want somebody like Hayden Wesniewski, somebody like that. Maybe. So if you're going Eloy, then I need two pitchers. I need Yamamoto and Bieber or Glasnow. You know what I mean? Now, Now, if that's your package, then I'll take it. Okay, then I'll take it. But just Eloy, no.
Now,
too much White Sox stink on him.
Another former Cub is Nick Castellanos, right? He's being shopped by the Phillies. The Cubs acquired Castellanos at the trade deadline in 2019 from Detroit, and he proceeded to tear it up at Wrigley Field and quickly became a fan favorite. In 51 games, Dustin, with the Cubs, he slashed 321, 356, 646 with 21 doubles and 16 home runs. He then parlayed that into a 5-year, $100 million contract with the Phillies. Castellanos has 3 more years on that contract and will make $20 million each of those years. His first year with the Phillies, he struggled, but he bounced back this season, slashing 272, 311, 476 with 29 home runs and 106 RBIs. Unlike Eloy, he can play some right field. He did really well in the NLDS and absolutely awful in the NLCS. So Nick Castellanos
greater than Eloy Jimenez, greater than. Okay,
now it's going to you still have 3 more years, and he's going to be getting $20 million a year for the next 3 years.
Cheap. Cubs could have done that deal, and who knows where the Cubs would have been, right now. I like that option. I wonder what they would want for him in return on the trade part of it, because he is controllable for 3 years at a pretty nice price. So they're probably going to want a couple of things better than a $5 scratch off ticket.
Now here's what I'm going to tell you, though. A lot of times they say either we want prospects or you pay some of the salary. That's kind of how it works, right?
Yep.
And so if the Cubs take on all the salary, which would be $60 million, then they're going to get less prospects back.
Right.
But if the Phillies want to sit there and pay some of that down, then the Cubs would be expected to give some more prospects. So, I
like this option, Crawly. I think this is an option that you could kick the tires on. I do. I like that a lot, because obviously you can't play Suzuki every single day in right field, right? And that would be a good little mix. I bet Nick could probably play a little left field if you really needed him to, right? And, give Ian Happ a day off, or if the matchup called for it or something like that.
Right. There's things that you can do. And so, more options than when you have with Eloy. So both him and Juan Soto are both okay fielders. I wouldn't put Nick Castellanos as a great fielder. He's okay. No. Soto's he's not a Gold Glove in my opinion. I don't know. But I would definitely.
And that's another thing. The Cubs are big on the defense, right? I mean, they're really big on the defense. I know this is DH/third baseman episode, but we're talking about a couple of guys that, maybe you could get away with in a corner outfield in a pinch.
Right. And imagine if one of those guys, imagine if Ian goes down or Seiya's injured or something, you can put those guys in there, and then you would assume that Craig Counsell would use Mike Tauchman after the 7th inning.
Yep.
Those are all possibilities. Mm-hmm. Now, third base is where it gets really interesting in the trade talks, and a couple of guys that just kind of popped out of nowhere, wasn't really expected. More and more you're hearing about Alex Bregman. The Astros and the Cubs both decided to tank at the same time to get high draft picks. The Cubs did get their World Series and 3 trips to the NLCS, but the Astros were able to have kind of the sustained success that Theo envisioned when taking over the Cubs. The Astros have won 2 World Series, one with the help of a garbage can, and the other, and they also have been, Dustin, to the ALCS for the last 7 seasons.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild.
Now, the core of the team has slowly been moving on. You had George Springer go to Toronto, and Carlos Correa is now in Minneapolis. Is Bregman next? Last season, he hit 262, 363, 441 with 25 home runs and RBIs in 161 games. He's in the final season of a 5-year, $100 million contract he signed in March of 2019. He stands to make $28.5 million in 2024 before hitting free agency. Alex Bregman has a lot of leadership skills, good glove. It seems, again, to check all the boxes. You're just going to have to you're going to have to give something up for a year of him. And if you really like Alex Bregman and he likes it here, maybe he comes back.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea, but I think I like the next guy that we're going to talk about, that we've talked about before, that's been rumored before, a little bit more.
Yes, Bo Bichette is another name that's popped up recently, and he's a shortstop for the Blue Jays. But would the Cubs be willing to trade for him and move him to third base? The Cubs obviously have the best defensive shortstop in Dansby Swanson. But if you move Bo Bichette, who is no slouch himself with the glove, that infield would be absolutely ridiculous, depending on who you had for first. But on that, second, short, and third would all be gold glovers there. And so the rumor has been growing since my friend Kevin Fiddler put it out on Twitter. And then it was brought up by John Morosi. And so the Blue Jays keep saying the right thing. Oh, no. But you got to listen, right? You have to listen to offers and see what happened. Bichette / 306, 339, 475 with 20 home runs and 73 RBIs last season. He turns 26 next year, and he's still under contract for 2 more seasons. He makes only $11 million in 2024 and $16.5 million in 2025, which is a lot for me and you, but nothing compared to what Juan Soto is going to get.
Right. I like this. I like this a lot. I like the lineage. I've seen him play a little bit. This is another idea that I can get behind.
Yeah, and it's just a question of, it's for the Blue Jays, do they feel that they still have a chance to go all the way?
It doesn't seem like it. It does. It seems like they're looking to hit that reset button once again.
If that's the case, then Bichette would be one of their best, chips.
And then and now you start lining him up. The other thing about it, Crawly, is you start lining him up time-wise where he's signed with guys like Dansby Swanson, right? Nico Horner, Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki. You got all these guys kind of in the same window, and you say, okay, here we go. This is our group to try to do this, and then we'll decide what we're doing after that. We'll see how close they get.
Right. Now, the last name is one Isaac Paredes, and he's the third baseman for the Tampa Bay Rays. And here's the thing. I always get nervous with the Tampa Bay Rays and trading because they always seem to get the most out of these guys and then trade them, and who knows. But he only slashed 250, 352, 488, but he had 31 home runs, Dustin, and 98 RBIs. He is only 24 years old and isn't set to become a free agent until 2028. So why on God Green's earth would the Rays be willing to part with them? Well, our guest coming up in the second segment, Michael Cerami, had an interesting look, and some of the things that people are concerned about with Cody Bellinger, the hard hit rate, those type of things. You can multiply that times 2 with Isaac Paredes, a guy who just had the 13th lowest exit velo in MLB. 10th lowest hard hit rate, those type of things. So every now and then, when baseball's a funny game, like you just get lucky with your hits. And so the question is if a guy is not hitting the ball, the harder you hit the ball, obviously, mathematically, you should be getting more hits. But this is a guy that's numbers went down as far as the hard hit percentage and the barrels and all that stuff. So just one of those things that I take a look at Paredes, and he's only 24. You know what I mean? It's not to say that it can't improve, but I don't, I'm not really sure I would go 100% this route, especially when we talked about, like I said, Bichette and Alex Bregman. Those are some fun names, but Paredes is an interesting one to just kind of keep your eye out. So
yeah, I did see some headlines out there, Crawly, about the red flags with this guy. So interested to learn more about that.
Right. So, there's plenty out there for the Cubs to look at. So I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to do one free agent in a trade or a couple free agents or maybe even a couple trades. Who knows? But we know that the Cubs need pieces. And for me personally, I would like to stop doing this 1 year merry-go-round at first and third. I just want to get someone anchored in there that can, be with this team, like you said, in that timeline where with the core that they currently have.
So a couple more quick names before we move on.
Yeah, just keep in mind that there's other guys out there. Jorge Polanco's a name. Cub fans know Brandon Donovan from the time with his time with the Cardinals, but these would be second basemen that could also play the corner outfield spots. So, with Jorge Polanco, he's $12.5 million next year. And, with an option for 2025. And then, when you talk about Brandon Donovan, he's another guy. We've seen him with the Cardinals and stuff like that, but, he had some injuries last year, but he slashed 284, 365, 422 with 11 homers. But again, that's only in 371 plate appearances. So, just there's options out there. It just depends on what the Cubs want to do and what they want to give up.
Yep. All depending. We'll wait and see, but this is fun. There's no doubt about that. You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It's episode 92 of season 2. Cubs trade options at the DH and the third base spot. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. And with the winter meetings happening next week, we could see a whole lot of free agent movement. And in this segment, Crawly talks to Michael Cerami of Bleacher Nation about the Cubs' finances and how they are in good shape to make a big signing.
Joining me now on the Fly the W podcast, you recognize him from his work on Bleacher Nation. Michael Cerami, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back on the show and happy to talk some Cubs financial ability.
Well, here's the thing, Michael. I mean, how nervous do you get right now when you're talking to a guy like me when all of a sudden the obsessive Ohtani watch is going on? Like, do you ever have that feeling like, oh, I got to shovel the driveway and that's going to be the moment that the news breaks that Shohei has signed with the Cubs?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, like, you wake up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I'm like, oh, did I miss anything? Check Jeff Passan, Jeff Ken Rosenthal. Like, I got my specific Twitter list that I have to go through. And yeah, it's 24/7 because, man, even if he doesn't pick the Cubs, it's going to be a crazy windfall for the rest of the, market and industry. And we got the winter meetings coming up. I mean, it's just, there's a lot that's about to happen and there's not much you can do before it does.
Well, then, people always ask me, and they'll be like, hey, Crawly, what are the Cubs going to sign Ohtani? Are they going to trade for, Pete Alonso? And I'm like, look, I don't know what the hell they're going to do, but I can tell you their name's being brought up, which is something that hasn't happened in a few years. And as a Cub fan, for me, there's nothing worse than the winter meeting when you keep seeing other teams linked to players and your team is nowhere in the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I one of my favorite things I've written in the last year was before the 2023 season, where I was like, I just want the Cubs to be relevant again. It was so disheartening, depressing when they just were not talked about. I mean, everyone had set them aside for a couple of years at least because they all knew that they weren't doing anything. And right now they're attached to everybody. There's very few players that they're not, of the main people that they're not attached to. And it's guys like, Blake Snell and Aaron Nola before he signed. Like, we haven't really seen a lot of that. But for everyone else, from Yamamoto to Ohtani to Soto to Alonso to Glasnow to Bieber, I mean, the Cubs are involved. They're obviously going to do something this offseason. I think it's going to be something probably pretty big. And a lot of that is because of how much money they have available.
Well, that's again, I always read Bleacher Nation and see what's going on, what you guys are up to, and your article kind of really, just caught my eye when with the title, "How much money do the Cubs have coming off the books after this season?" And so, we've been kind of in the last couple episodes just talking about, okay, who are some free agents out there, who are some trade targets, all of those type of things. And like you said, when you take a look at the money right here, and I'm just putting this up here from Spot Track, you're looking at the money that people can spend. It feels to me like the Cubs just have a lot of cash this season. I wasn't even looking at 2025. I was just looking at 2024 and saying to myself, wow, there is just, you mentioned your article, the Jason Hayward contract and just a lot of different things that are happening. And it seems like this is a good time to be sitting flush with cash like the Cubs appear to. But you say that as good as 2024 is going to be, 2025 is going to be even crazier.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, there's no doubt that that money fell off the books this year. Hayward, Bellinger, Stroman alone count for a lot of money. But it's not just this offseason. When you look ahead to after this this season. I think there should be as much as like 50 million coming off of their luxury tax money, in addition to all the space they still have right now, which is a lot. It's significant, but Kyle Hendricks will be a free agent. Drew Smiley, Jan Gomes, Tucker Barnhart, Trey Mancini, David Bodie. I mean, those are some of those guys that we forget about because the Cubs have either cut bait or they're in the minors or they've been outrighted. And what's more exciting is not just the 50 million extra that they should have. Again, that's on top of all the money they already have available this offseason, which is significant as well. But usually when you lose a lot of when you gain a lot of financial breathing room, a lot of the times that's because you have to replace those guys. But like Cody Bellinger or Marcus Stroman, yeah, sure, we're dropping that salary, but we need someone to backfill those performances. Well, we don't need someone to backfill the performance of David Bodie or Trey Mancini or Tucker Barnhart. And like Jan Gomes, I think by this time next year, we'll feel good about Miguel Amaya. And, I think Jan Gomes will already have been transitioned in sort of a partial role anyway. So you're really looking at like Kyle Hendricks and maybe whatever the Cubs get out of Drew Smiley as the pieces the Cubs need to replace. And so that money might be accounted for. But all the rest is just like going to be like free money because it's not players that you need to sign to fill up those spots. So that's really exciting. And I think that's going to really allow the Cubs to maneuver this offseason in a way that will be more aggressive if this money wasn't coming off the books next year. And not to be long-winded, but it struck me when I was looking through the numbers and doing the math that like a lot of the other ways that a payroll tends to get eaten up is arbitration, but there are effectively no players that the Cubs will be entering into arbitration besides Justin Steele, who will be ARB2, and Adbert Alzolay, who will be as well. That should get significant raises, and both of those guys still won't be breaking the bank in just their second year of arbitration, even if they're really good. It'll be affordable. And then all of the players under contract, a lot of the times, most teams backload contracts, but these guys are either holding steady like Horner and Happ, or Swanson and Seiya, who one gets a $2 million raise, one gets a $2 million decrease. And although that doesn't affect the AAV for luxury tax reasons, it's just further underscoring how much money the Cubs have to spend, either in terms of real dollars or luxury tax. I mean, there is just nothing but space.
Right. And the other thing to kind of keep in mind, and I know that Brett Taylor's written about this, is the RSN implosion, where the Cubs are sitting there with a lot of cash. You're going to see a lot of teams, the Padres, the Cardinals, anyone with the Diamond Valley that are going to end up losing a lot of infusion of cash, where the Cubs are kind of sitting pretty with Marquee, as much as people kind of were like, what did he say? What did Tom say? You won't be booing in a year. Maybe he wasn't right on the timeline, but he should, he's certainly looking a lot smarter right now, because those teams that had those big RSNs right now are sitting there and they are not going to have money to spend.
No, absolutely. And I think that here's what I think the nuanced addition to your point, which is correct, is I think that Marquee probably never made the Cubs as much money as they were hoping. It certainly isn't making them as much money as the heyday of these RSN deals when they were active. But what it limits in upside, it backfills in floor, because the Cubs control their own fate and they can feel confident in their future, which will not only give them, provide them with money, which is great, but also the sort of assurances that these other teams definitely do not have. So their relative spending ability over these other 16 teams should increase, which is, again, it's not changing the amount of money the Cubs are making, but it's maybe making them more capable of spending the money they do have, because other teams, other front offices won't have the certainty that the RSN deals were previously providing.
Right. And the best example of that is the Padres, you know what I mean? Where they were spending like, drunk sailors on leave. And now all of a sudden they're having to take out loans and stuff like that. And that's where you see guys like Juan Soto's obviously the big name, and Blake Snell, and just not coming back to these teams. And these players are going to be available. Tell me a little bit though now, obviously we know the big names that are out there. You mentioned Yamamoto, we talked about Shohei. Couple, Cody Bellinger obviously is out there, but there are guys that are on the trade market. Let's say Juan Soto, let's say Pete Alonso, and they're only 1 year away from free agency. Why would you say the Cubs should maybe trade for one of those guys when you can just wait out a year and have even more money like you're talking about to spend?
Sure. And I know you know the answer to this, but I appreciate the tee up. Why don't we wait a year and sign Mookie Betts? Because he didn't make it to free agency. Why don't we wait a year and get Francisco Lindor? Because he didn't make it to free agency. These guys, I know that they're Scott Boras clients and they often don't extend. That's not a blanket statement. It could still happen. And on top of that, and two other things. So one, they might not make it to free agency. So you need to get them when you can. Two, even if they're going to make it to free agency, you get an entire year to figure out what they like, what they don't like, if they're the right fit for your organization, and vice versa, and to woo them. And you have that nice little tiny, window where they can only talk to you, exclusivity. And then lastly, and this is the most important one, is there some reason why we shouldn't be trying to win in 2024? No. So yeah, I will take Juan Soto for a year and see what happens after that. I'll take Pete Alonso for a year and see what happens after that. I'll take Tyler Glasnow, Shane Bieber, all these guys. You don't just not get them because they're going to be free agents. And I actually really want to hammer this point home because it happens in so many different ways. But like everything we learned from like 2010, 12 to now, in terms of baseball smarts and Moneyball and Theo Epstein, and it's all true and right and it's great. But so many of these lessons have been overlearned in that people are suddenly willing to not want to acquire Juan Soto because the value isn't right because he'll be a free agent. It's like, well, no, because he's going to play somewhere next year and he can help the Cubs win next year. It doesn't all have to be about this long-term asset-oriented thinking. You can just get the good players when they're available and play them on your team. And on top of all of that, a team like the Cubs, whose farm system is as strong as any other teams in baseball right now, they are consensus top 5 to many, the top farm system in baseball. This is exactly when you should be using those superfluous prospects as trade chips to get good players for the big league team. Some of those prospects won't work out. Some of them will be blocked by other players. And some of them, you might end up saying, I wish I didn't trade that guy. But if you're trading that guy for Juan Soto, who just a few years ago was, the Ted Williams of the modern day, right? It's okay. It's okay to have good players and to use your prospect capital. The idea, the hope, and the fear that I think a lot of fans get animated by is, the last time the Cubs started making some trades, they didn't continue to churn out prospects at the same rate, and that depleted the system and ended the run a little bit early. Okay, maybe, sure, true, but one, it doesn't have to play out that way again. I think the Cubs are. I think Jed Hoyer specifically is much more cautious and guarded about what he's giving up and getting back, and I think that Theo, whom I love, was a little bit more of a gunslinger and like, let's go get the guy and whatever and let's win. But again, even just zoom back into a couple of those specific deals. Gleyber Torres for Aroldis Chapman, is the value right there? No, of course it's not. The trade would never happen in a million years nowadays. But the Cubs won the World Series, so it's kind of okay, right? Eloy and Cease for Quintana, yeah, that was incorrect. But again, that had the right concept in mind. It just didn't work out with Quintana, the player. It's not about not trading prospects. It's about making sure you make the right trades. That's self evaluation and correctly identifying which guys are all right to move on from, and also correctly identifying the players that you're going after. But long story short, the Cubs have a ton of prospect depth. The types of prospects that are traded nowadays are not like the types of prospects that were traded the last time the Cubs are doing this. And there's good players to be had in a year when the Cubs should be trying to be good. And they have guys at the upper levels of the minors that are ready to contribute. And there's absolutely no reason in my mind that you can just sit out the possibility of acquiring a 25-year-old Juan Soto because he'll be a free agent in a year. Okay, well, there's a whole year in between that.
And to hammer home your point a little bit, it's Cody Bellinger truly sounded like he enjoyed playing in Chicago, and when he makes a decision, whatever he makes, and I don't know if the Cubs are in on him or not, but he's going, having that year of just how enjoyable the Cubs, playing the day games for a lot of these guys that have families, or just the crowds that you get every single day, and the national fan base that they have. There's a lot that's attractive about the Cubs. And I think you saw that with Craig Counsell coming over now, and a lot of the things that are happening, people are saying like, hey, things are happening there. And if you can bring, a Juan Soto or a Cody Bellinger or Pete Alonso and be like, hey, this is what we have to offer. The Cubs have and they have money too.
Yeah. And let me add, I think I sort of said this, but I want to drive it home even more. Let's say the Cubs love Juan Soto and they want to sign him next offseason when he's a free agent, which let's say he's definitely going to be a free agent. Let's say he came out and said, no matter what, under any circumstances, I'm not signing an extension. Okay, cool. Wouldn't you rather, before you spent $450 million potentially on a 26, soon to be 26-year-old in a year from now, Juan Soto, have a year to watch him closely, fully and intimately know his medicals, how he works, what kind of person he is, what kind of player he is, before you make a $500 million investment in him? Wouldn't that have some value? Not just in ensuring that he's the guy you want, but how about ensuring he's a guy that you don't want, right? So let's say you go, oh my God, this guy is, he doesn't take care of himself, or he doesn't, whatever it is. What a useful piece of information to gain to protect yourself against the wrong $500 million investment a year from now. So that has value too. And I think fans kind of just overlook that, like, just wait and get him next year. Might not be there, but even if he is, you might not know everything that you want to know before signing him. A recent example of that is, like, look at the reverse version of that with Carlos Correa and the Astros. They knew stuff that everyone else didn't know. And that's why their offers to him weren't anywhere close to what everybody else was offering him. And then the medicals fell apart and people learned things. And suddenly it's a very different story, right? Knowing those guys, having them in your system, working with your trainers, your coaches, your players, how he fits in, all of that stuff matters a lot. And I think that's useful information to gain.
Now, if you were to get a Juan Soto, would you anticipate him kind of rotating with Seiya and Ian and the DH position, or what would you see Juan Soto's role with the Cubs being?
That's a great question. I think there's sort of two ways to look at this, and they almost go against each other, but I think they're both true at the same time. I think the only way the Cubs would ever use the designated hitter role in any sort of like isolated to one player instance would be for a bat the caliber of Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, maybe like three other guys that exist in baseball. That's the only time you're like, it's actually worth it to go after, acquire, use players' money to get the sort of player. So I do think that Juan Soto is the type of player that could DH only and still provide a ton of value. But I also think that mixing in with Happ and Seiya would be a beautiful way to use all three bats. You have a lefty, a righty, and a switch hitter, and optimizing the lineups on a day-to-day basis, but also maximizing rest, because I think that's something, as much as it's endearing, I think the Cubs were a little overplayed this year. I don't think there was really enough rest, especially for Dansby and Nico, and Happ played a ton. I don't remember offhand, but I think he played the most games he's ever played. And, Seiya's had injuries in the past. I mean, these are things and guys that you can rest, but you only really are comfortable doing that if you have the right other players to maximize that rest and still win games in the meantime without giving stuff up. So if you get someone like Juan Soto, you could use them in a rotation. Now, I think that the way it would work out practically is most of the time Soto's your DH, but he could play right, he could play left, and Happ and Seiya can also DH, and they can also take days off. And I think that that's a perfectly wonderful way to go about it. And I especially like the idea of adding a really big bat in that position, like Shohei or Soto, because it might allow you to more comfortably use Pete Crow Armstrong in center field, perhaps even earlier than you would otherwise, because you can carry his potentially weaker bat early on if you're making up for the offense elsewhere. And you still get to take advantage of his glove then. So I think it's pretty critical that the Cubs get a like true impact bat, of which there are not many available, unfortunately, at least in the free agent market. But I do think they're going to try to. And DH, first base are kind of the only options because I do think, at least I do think I hope. I think I hope more than I think that Christopher Morel could emerge as the third baseman, and I think he can be an impact bat as soon as next season. I think he's already as close to as a lock of a above average offensive producer as the Cubs have. I think he will. I think we just need to like get that out of the way and settle that. He is going to be an above average offensive producer, but I do think he's capable of being special too. So you're looking at first base and DH as the primary opportunities to add that bat. And if you add a DH, you have the added benefit of, swinging it around happens Suzuki, like you said.
And the one that also gets Cub fans interested is Pete Alonso. Ever since getting rid of Rizzo, that first base position has just been an absolute bugaboo for the Cubs. And you're just sitting there just saying like, you just want an anchor there, somebody to take over that position. And when I think about Pete Alonso and just the damage he does against the Cubs and the potential damage he can do playing 81 games at Wrigley Field, it is definitely something that gets Cub fans excited.
Yeah, and it's weird. The Ohtani stuff has just sucked up all the oxygen in the room because this offseason started pretty hot and heavy with Alonso and Soto rumors for the Cubs, trade rumors, and then both sort of died down considerably as all of the attention has been focused on Ohtani and Glass now this last week or so. But I think Pete Alonso would be an excellent addition. He's still young. He hits for power, and he plays a position of need for the Cubs. I don't think. The Mets have been pretty confounding because they initially seemed to suggest that they were going to take sort of a gap year, trading their big aces halfway through the year, 3 months into their new deals. And then sort of the tone changed a little bit, and suddenly they're being attached to guys like Yamamoto, especially. But then at the same time, you look at them and you say every dollar extra they're spending right now is like $2 because of the way where their payroll is at and the luxury tax. They're at the very, 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 very top tier. And I find it hard to believe that they're going to lay out any extra cash for Pete Alonso this offseason when it costs that much more in relative dollars than they could by trading him to another team. So we'll see. I get less of a sense that he's available than it seemed like earlier in the offseason. But that may ultimately just depend on what happens elsewhere with the Mets. If they're able to land someone like Yamamoto, then Pete Alonso is not going anywhere. He's going to play first base for them next year because they're going to want to win. If not, maybe they do take that little bit of a gap year and reset, shed some payroll, and then go hog wild next offseason. Again, also, do you want to go up against the Mets for Juan Soto next year? Like, do you really think you're going to outspend Steve Cohen? Like, I don't think so. So. No. That kind of thing is one of those things you got to take the opportunity when it exists, and it just doesn't come up that often.
Now, Cub fans would love nothing more than a reunion with Cody Bellinger, and when there has been people that have been like not happy with as far as some of the metrics with Cody Bellinger, but when he was here, he just seemed to do a lot of good things. So the question is, can he repeat, or was this just kind of a fluke year? Would you see the Cubs interested in re-signing Cody Bellinger?
So from what I understand, and this is informed partly by the reports that are out there and partly by some things I've heard just loosely, I'm pretty confident that he is not like their top priority. I'm using the words of a quote that has already existed. I think that that's true. I think that the only way Bellinger ends up back in Chicago is if two things happen. The Cubs have a big offseason. They get someone like Ohtani or Yamamoto or whatever you want to say it is, something where they're looking good. And at the same time, Cody Bellinger lingers on the market. And the way that that'll happen is if, like, for example, the Yankees, his other biggest potential suitor, land Juan Soto, let's say, and then they don't necessarily have the appetite to give Bellinger what he wants. And I just think right now that Bellinger's asking price is significant and probably more than he's going to be worth. I think he can be a really good player still. I just don't think he's going to be as good as he was last year necessarily. And I do think that he's either going to be pushed out of center field by Pete Crow Armstrong, or eventually just age out of the position, reducing the value further and requiring his bat to be better, which we already don't think it necessarily is going to be. So if you're a team that has a more obvious opening in center field, I think you're going to be more comfortable signing Cody Bellinger than the Cubs would be. And on top of all of this, looming in the background is the San Francisco Giants, who cannot seem to get anybody to sign with them, and they want Cody Bellinger badly. So there's, the Yankees and Giants both want Bellinger. The Yankees are also interested in Soto. It seems likely that what could happen is Soto goes to New York, Bellinger goes to San Francisco. And that's kind of how I see it playing out. But I certainly hope he comes back, and I hope it's on a deal that makes sense. And I don't think he needs to settle for an under market deal. If he got something in the Brandon Nimmo range, like, okay, we're talking. But I think he's still north of 200 million in his asking price. It's not me reporting that. That's just what my general understanding is. And that's too much. I mean, I don't think that that's the right contract for Cody Bellinger for the Cubs right now.
All right. So no full belly for Bellinger. Michael, I appreciate you jumping on here and taking a couple minutes to talk finances and look at some of these players the Cubs might be interested in. Where can our listeners find your work? Obviously at Bleacher Nation, any of your socials, anything you want to plug right now? Here's the time.
Yeah. BleacherNation.com. And then, my Twitter is at Michael_Cerami. So, please follow and let's talk about the Cubs on Twitter.
And the next time I will be seeing you, my friend, will be at Cubs convention, where hopefully I don't know, maybe we're drinking beer, maybe we're drinking champagne. Let's see what happens, but it's going to be a happening. I'll tell you that much.
Oh yeah. I think it's going to be a good one this year. I think the Cubs are going to have some new shiny faces to announce. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, man. Then we will see you then, Michael, and appreciate you jumping on with us.
Thanks a lot.
This is the Fly the W670 podcast, trade options at DH and third base. It's episode 92 of season 2. We don't want you to forget. We want to remind you, keep in mind to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. All right, Crawly, great job with Michael from Bleacher Nation. Now let's get into some hot stove news because it's getting warm.
Oh, it's cooking, Dustin. It's cooking. And this is the time of year when things kind of start to get interesting. Since our last podcast, 2 teams have made a couple of free agent moves. The Reds fortified their bullpen by adding relief pitchers Nick Martinez for 2 years, $26 million, while Emilio Pagan is going to get 2 years, $16 million. Meanwhile, the Mets signed former Yankee starter Luis Severino to a 1-year, $13 million contract, and third baseman Joey Wendell to a 1-year, $2 million contract. Again, Dustin, the only big splash so far in free agency has been the Phillies re-signing Aaron Nola, but that should change next week with baseball's winter meetings coming up December 4th through 7th in Nashville, Tennessee. Our own Bruce Levine is going to be there.
Yes.
And the GM meetings happened in November, and that's where a framework for a lot of these deals kind of start in the GM meetings. So they kind of get some ideas, they kind of feel each other out, talk things with the agents and stuff like that. But the winter meetings are usually where these deals go down. Now, 670 The Score contributor and Odyssey insider John Heyman said that Shohei Ohtani's free agency could end at the meeting next week. So you want to make sure that you are, if anything happens, we'll break with an emergency podcast. You could also follow us at Fly the W670 and at Crawly's Cubs for all the breaking news. But this is going to be an interesting week right before and during these winter meetings.
Yep. I can't wait for them to get started. Good time for, I know you don't care, but a good time for me with the Bears on the bye.
Hey, I watched Monday Night Football, man. I was watching some of that. Yeah,
we watch Thursday Night Football. Are you? I'm sure you're an Amazon Prime guy because if you have any Cubs stuff you buy off of Prime, you're going to want it instantly. Are you going to tune into Thursday Night Football? Or hey, Tell everybody what you were watching last night on Marquee. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I was watching, Marquee always has sometimes these famous games. And so they were playing Sammy Sosa's when he got a 61st and 62nd home run in 1998. So for me, most of the time, no, I'm not watching football. I'm watching Marquee. I literally live on Marquee. So it was fun to kind of see that happen. And just the memories of Sammy Sosa hitting those home runs, 2 in one game, one of them in the 9th inning. And just
especially
the madness.
After you got your stuff back that you got signed by him.
Yeah, it was fun timing. So no more football for me this weekend. So it'll be all baseball. But speaking of baseball, the Brewers made a shocking signing today, Dustin. No, not for one of the top free agents, but by signing their number 1 prospect and the number 2 prospect in all of baseball, 19-year-old Jackson Chourio, to an 8-year, $80 million deal that includes 2 Cubs options. Dustin, that is the biggest contract ever given to a player who has never played a game in the big leagues. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds and if other, especially smaller market teams, do the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the White Sox kind of did some of this stuff too. Not these kind of dollars, obviously, but signed guys. But boy, if you're signing him to that much, he better be up pretty soon, right?
I mean, 19 years old. It's
$80 million.
That's
I know it's 8 years, but still, I mean, I'd like to make some of that. Gosh,
yeah,
it's crazy to me. Have you heard about? I mean, what does this guy do? What's you follow this stuff very closely? I mean, what's the comp? Anything? You know anything or not really?
When you talk about Jackson Chourio, he's just everybody says he's the real deal. He comes from Venezuela. Yeah,
We're gonna have to ask Ozzie Guillen about him next time he's on.
Yeah, I talked to Ozzie, but I mean, it is nuts when you kind of think about it right there of what this kid can do, and I would say that I've seen a lot of prospects in my time, and there's been guys that are sure things, and you're absolutely positive aren't going to miss. You just don't know what's going to happen with an 18 and 19-year-old. There's tons of things that can happen, and when you give them that amount of money, it's sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You mentioned that the Cubs did it with Eloy and they did it with Luis Robert. It happens. It's just it's a huge gamble. Now, again, if it pays off, if it works out, it's not the end of the world either. If it pays off, if he's everything they think he's going to be, then they're going to be getting a bargain. And if he doesn't, it's not the worst move in the world either, right?
Right.
That's just kind of the way you look at it. He's a 5-tool player. He's fast. He can play defense. He can, he hits for home run. He's a really, really, like I said, you're the second best prospect in all of baseball. It's just something to keep in mind. It's just kind of mind blowing because there's just no precedent to it. You know what I mean? That much, that early.
Yeah, it's a lot of do-re-mi. A lot of do-re-mi.
Yeah, he's an outfielder.
Hope it messes up the Brewers. That's all I can say. Good for the kid. Good for the kid. I don't want anything bad to happen to the kid, but I'm all for the Brewers going sideways.
Right. And speaking of Brewers, former Brewer manager and current Cub manager Craig Counsell now has his bench coach when they hired Ryan Flaherty to fill the position vacated by Andy Green. You may remember that the Cubs drafted Flaherty in 2008, and he had an okay career, utility player. But when he was done, he got right into the coaching pipeline. He was the bench coach for Bob Melvin in San Diego. Dustin, how about this? Flaherty was teammates at Vanderbilt University with current Cub GM Carter Hawkins.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So obviously, Carter obviously had something to say about this position, but you'd think Craig Counsell had the final vote, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing is that I can tell you right now that Flaherty was very in demand for a lot of teams. He's just a young up and comer. When you think about some of those guys that everybody's excited at, I would say this is going to be a really good 1-2 punch with Counsell and Flaherty. I can't wait to see what those guys do. I'm feeling better every single day about, having Craig Counsell, coaching and having, managing and having Ryan Flaherty as his bench coach. I'm excited about things to come.
Yep. Yeah. It's an exciting move. I'm very curious as well.
Now, Cody Bellinger, we talked about this before. He won the NL Comeback Player of the Year last month, but that was given out by the MLB Players Association. So when you do the MLB Players Association, they vote for all these different awards, and that's voted on by all active MLB players, and they gave Cody the NL Comeback Player of the Year. This time, this was MLB's Player of the Year award, which is determined from a vote by the MLB.com's 30-team beat reporters.
I'm glad you said that because I was a little bit confused what was going on. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought he got this for that bonus, and then yeah, very, very confusing.
Right. So there's two separate ones. One of them is like the players, you know what I mean? Because and then the other one.
So he got the financial award off of the player vote.
That's my understanding. Yeah. Okay. And so it is the first time a Cubs player has won the award since they started giving it out in 2005. Liam Hendriks got it for the White Sox. I mean, I know that was a nice story, but coming back from cancer, obviously big deal, but it wasn't like his numbers pitching were the reason he got the award. You know what I mean?
Right. But when he did come in, the small amount of time that he did come back, I thought he did a halfway decent job. So again, it's a good story. Listen, for an award like this, it's all about the story, right? That's a part of it.
Sure. But, both on Chicago and both probably not coming back to either of their teams, but who knows? Maybe Cody, we'll see. I don't know if you heard this, but the Yankees were, like we were talking about Juan Soto earlier. The Yankees were looking at Juan Soto and they want obviously a king's ransom. And the Yankees were nobody wants to clean out their farm system.
Right.
And then the other issue though, is that they were looking at Cody Bellinger and he's asking for way more than what the Yankees feel comfortable with. So I haven't heard numbers yet, but I think they were a little bit taken aback by what Cody Bellinger will cost them. Right. So, you knew it's Scott.
Well, because it's Ohtani. It's Soto, and then it's Bellinger, right? I mean,
that's it.
And he's thinking, it's a small group of guys out there that are available on the free agency side of things, also, right? So
right.
you don't have to give Cody Bellinger, former employer, anything in return.
Right. Now, one other story we got going on, the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee will meet on Sunday, December 3rd to announce if any of the 8 candidates for the Contemporary Baseball Era Managers Executive Umpire ballot reach the 75% threshold. That's 12 out of 16 votes. The results of the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee vote will be announced live on MLB Network's MLB Tonight at 6:30 Central Time on Sunday, December 3rd. There's a little Cubs connection here. Some of the guys on this era here, you have 3 managers, 2 executives, and 2 umpires. Cito Gaston's on there. Davey Johnson. You remember Jim Leland?
Yep, of course.
I'm sure. Ed Montague,
probably got a heater. He's probably got a heater going right now.
Ed Montague, umpire, and everybody knows Country Joe West, another umpire. But the name that should interest Cub fans, how about Sweet Lou Piniella possibly getting into the Hall of Fame?
Sure. I wonder if it becomes a combined award, right? Now, is this specific? Is this for a contributor? I mean, if you take his role as a player and you combine that with his role as a manager, I think what he has given the game as a contributor overall, I think that's Hall of Fame worthy. Sure.
Yeah, this is basically for his managing career. But again, sometimes it's hard to separate when you think about those things. But
right, because he wouldn't get in as a player.
No.
But he was decent. He was decent, but he wasn't Hall of Fame.
Right. This would be for his managing. So it would be interesting to see what happens with our good buddy Lou Piniella. Speaking of good buddies, Dustin, I don't know if you saw these broadcasting awards, the NMSA 2023 award finalists for Illinois sportcasters. We just want to, highlight a couple of these guys that have all appeared on the Fly the W podcast. Congrats to Ron Coomer from 670 The Score, Cubs radio analyst. He was nominated. How about Josh Friedman? He's been on from WGN. He's been on the podcast. And then Megan Montemurro and Paul Sullivan from the Chicago Tribune. So congrats to all those guys. They do great work, and we loved having them on the podcast so far.
Indeed. Love all those guys. Absolutely.
Now, if you've been listening, Dustin, like I do, to Inside the Cub House every Saturday on 670 The Score, 9 to 12.
9 to 11, 9 to 11. Noon. Yeah, whatever happens. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, but it always starts at 9.
Yes, sir. About a month ago, Bruce Levine had Andre Dawson on, and I was listening to it, and I tweeted it out back then. Dawson was talking that he was trying to work with the Hall of Fame. He wants to switch his cap from an Expos cap to a Cubs cap. Now, you know, if you know Andre Dawson, obviously a Hall of Famer, just a fantastic player. But in all honesty, Dustin, his best years were with the Montreal Expos. And so this, you know, after Andre Dawson was put in with an Expos cap, then they let players start to choose which cap they were going into. And so I think Wade Boggs was the controversial one. I think the Rays paid him to go in with a Rays cap. And so, you know, he played the majority, you know, his prime years, 21 to 29 till, you know, or I'm sorry, till 31. So 21 to 31. So he played 10 years in Montreal. He played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons with the Cubs. Obviously, he had the MVP in 1987. But, you know, that was by far his best year. But, you know, solid in Chicago too. But what are your thoughts on this, Dustin, on this situation here?
He's always going to be a Cub to me. Whatever Andre Dawson wants, Andre Dawson should get. I mean, one of the all-around just good guys, and what a fabulous baseball player. I mean, one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Cubs of all time. I've told the story about, you know, the time I got to meet him was in the media, you know, sweating profusely as I talked to him in the actually Miami Marlins clubhouse, the last game he ever played against the Cubs. I ran over there as a young reporter after I had done my business in the Cubs clubhouse, ran across the home plate of Wrigley Field and ran into the dugout and got down into the area and interviewed Andre Dawson. So big fan. Whatever he wants is fine. But regardless of what his plaque shows, to me, he's always a Cub. That's fine. It doesn't. I mean, is it a financial thing? You know, whatever.
It's funny though. He kind of said something to the effect of, "Look, I'm 70. What do I care what anybody says about me anymore?" You know,
right.
And so I think he truly believes that his career was revitalized in Chicago. He loved the fans. He loved playing at Wrigley. He loved going out to the bleachers and the fans would give him the old salami down in right field. So I think it really means a lot to him. And if you remember Greg Maddux, he doesn't have a name on his cap. He said both teams, both organizations, the Cubs and the Braves, just meant so much to him in different ways. And he chose to go in with no cap, with no team on his cap. So just kind of interesting to see where this flies. But, you know, Andre Dawson, like you said, in our minds, always a Cub.
Always a Cub. Well, that's a wrap. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow us on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram. Of course, you can email Crawly and I, flythew670@gmail.com. And you can watch us YouTube by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel. Crawly, have a great weekend. I will be watching some football over the weekend, but if something does happen, we will have an emergency podcast before Monday.
This next week and a half is going to be exciting, so don't go anywhere. Follow the Fly the W on the socials, and yes, let's just get ready. Maybe next time we talk, we'll see some Ohtani. Go Cubs!